it took me a while to connect. Internet, somebody who works on digital research, this is something very, something that we constantly face and something that we have to talk about all the time. But I'm glad that I'm at least able to uh, be here and uh, talk about something that is to do with a very practical aspect of doing research. Usually, when we have research methodology workshops, we tend to go back to a lot of theory of research, go back to a lot of ideas about connecting theories and methodology. But the practical aspects of doing research are usually something that we don't speak about as often. I'm very glad that you have organized this workshop where we are able to speak of all of this, that all of us are able to learn of this from each other and also through the questions and through basically sitting and talking about these things again. We're also able to, make a couple of hopefully headways in our own. I'll
Pratichi, can you unmute yourself? You're muted, I guess. Can you just unmute?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is this
And
okay now?
this is a request to the other participants. Please do not switch on your microphone till the resource person speaks. Okay, you can continue.
Yeah. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I have to, redo the introduction. So I was thanking everybody and, particularly Gargi and Huri for organizing this workshop because usually we don't speak about the practical aspects of doing research so much. So hopefully this is very, you know, something that really helps us out. But those of us who are doing the sessions and as well as those who are participating, because just speaking about these issues make us think about our own research quite a bit. So it was a really fruitful exercise for me to try and go back to these texts and try and think about the methods and planning of research in a very concrete manner. So thanks to everybody for organizing this, particularly Maureen and Gargi. I'm going to speak about developing a research plan. So once you have figured out your literature review and once you have started doing all of that, the first task before we set out to do our research is to do with developing the research plan itself. And if we can just go to the first slide, uh, we get Gargi, if we can, yeah. So if you see, we'll see two quotations here, which seem to be quite contradictory to each other. And the first one is, of course, something that we speak of all the time, particularly when we are doing qualitative research, is that no matter how carefully one plans in advance, research is designed in the course of its execution. Which is that, no matter how much you figure out things, qualitative research in particular is done when we are speaking to the participants and we are speaking to our respondents. And through that, we learn what is to be done. But the second quote is by Miles and Huberman, and they say that qualitative research designs do exist. And this is something that we usually, those of us who do ethnographies, those of us who do participant observation, we usually feel that qualitative research is done just in the process of it, and it's not something that we really plan. If you can go to the next slide. So participatory research or qualitative research and ethnographic techniques are something that involve a long-term immersion in the field. It involves a plethora of complex day-to-day things that we are observing constantly. And that means that often we just tend to wing it. Often we just tend to go with the flow and not really plan out in detail the process of doing research. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And that often gives the impression to other researchers generally within society also, and this is something a lot of us qualitative researchers keep on hearing all the time, is that this is something that is unsystematic, this is something that is not scientific, this is something that is simply a narration of our personal experiences or observations. So it's not research per se. And this is a debate that, of course, qualitative research has had to face from the very beginning. And that is why positivism was so hell bent on trying to make us a scientific discipline and trying to make model us after natural sciences, to say that, we are a serious science and we are doing serious research. So it becomes very important for qualitative researchers, for ourselves, but also for the sake of institutional requirements, to try and have some kind of a systematic research plan that will clearly demonstrate what is it that we are trying to do. If you can go to the next slide. Um, Here you'll see that we are talking. Um, uh, there's a request if you can put the slides on presentation mode rather than the work mode. There's a request in the audience.
Yeah, we are trying to put the slides in presentation mode, but it's not happening actually. So it's
Okay.
the slides
Sorry,
are not moving
whoever made that
forward.
request.
Pratishi, you are
I
muted
hope you can
again.
see everything though clearly and
Unmute.
visible.
Yeah.
In case you're not, perhaps, I'll share the entire presentation towards the end of the session. And if you want to look at particular definitions and references, it's all there in the presentation. So yeah, we were talking about the need for a qualitative research plan, and a lot of scholars have then tried to say that there's a dual function that they solve, particularly in terms of the internal function, which is giving us an orientation to the research process, which is telling us, particular milestones that we need to achieve, or necessary decisions that we might need to take through the course of the research. It makes us ready as a researcher ourselves. But also externally for institutional purposes, this is something that really helps demonstrate the clarity of the research. It helps and externally evaluate whether it's the institution, whether it is for funding purposes or publication purposes. If you have a clear research design or a clear research plan, it really reveals the different parameters, and therefore you are able to evaluate the research properly. For example, if you have clear-cut research questions, or you have clear sampling and methods and procedures that's mentioned within the research plan, it's something that an external observer, an institution can use to evaluate your research and therefore take a decision on your funding or publication or things like that. And before we go into all of that, all of these parameters of your research design, first let's go to the idea of a qualitative research plan or a research design itself. If you can go to the next slide. So what do we mean by a research plan and a research design? And if you look at the next slide, there are multiple definitions that are being given by different scholars about what do they understand with qualitative research design. And it can be a very minimalist sort of a definition, where it simply is talking about a framework for data collection or analysis, to extensive ideas of design. And there are various scholars who agree and disagree with what they understand with a research design. Some of them would suggest that there should be theoretical and methodological and ethical considerations that's part of your design itself, something that also has a degree of reflexivity. There would be others who say that your ideas of analysis, your ideas of the ways you are going to use your resources, all of that should be very much part of your design. And others would just suggest that it could be a semi-structured approach of simply laying out particular kinds of framework. Nevertheless, what you do need are particular things that give you a sort of direction of where you are heading to with your research design. I have a couple of scholars here who have given us some components of research design. The first one is Ivy Flick, And he says that you should have your research questions, methods of selection, the resources that you use, and the theoretical framework that you're using, as well as the goals of your research, right? So your goals of presentation, your goals of how you want to generalize from the particular issue that you are taking. So Flick gives us certain components, and then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that Joseph Maxwell also gives us a few components of research, which is slightly broader and slightly more sort of questions of introspection by the researcher themselves. So he's talking about purposes of research, right? Why are we doing this study? What is the conceptual context of doing the research? What are the particular research questions? What are the different methods that you're going to use? Or how are you going to test the validity of your research? And the final research proposal, which very much then becomes part of the research design or the research plan at the very outset of doing research. Uh, Different scholars have different ideas, but it all boils down to, if you can go to the next slide, is why do we want to do this study? What will be studied? And how will it be studied, right? These are three essential components that we should ultimately have in the research plan that we are laying out. They can be as detailed or as sort of loose as you wish, and perhaps at the beginning they are slightly looser, slightly more generalized. And as we sort of proceed with our initial bits of research, it becomes more and more tighter. Uh, so at the very outset, then, we are asking ourselves this question: why are we doing this research? What are the personal, practical, and research purposes of doing this research? And this is to do with, again, both an institutional requirement, but also telling ourselves why is it that we are interested in this particular issue? What are the various things that are motivating us to try and pursue this particular context of the research that we are looking at, particularly when we are doing qualitative research, and particularly when we are doing ethnographic work. It becomes, since we are so immersed in our field, and ethnographic work requires us to immerse ourselves in the field, it's very easy to sort of lose ourselves. It's very easy to drown ourselves in stories that we hear from many different respondents. And a lot of the times you will find that once you are in the field, each story seems so compelling that it could be a paper that you write in itself. Similarly, it becomes very easy for us to spend time and effort doing a lot of things that just the previous slide, we'll come to this one in a bit. It becomes very easy for us to, lose ourselves in the plethora of a lot of interesting things that we gather from the field, but not necessarily always answering the research question. So it becomes very important for us to have a clear cut plan which lists out the purpose of doing research. All right. This will guide the research plan to ensure that our study is actually worth doing. It helps justify our study to the institution, but it also, guides us with a clear sense of purpose of the research. Why is it that we are motivated to do the research? So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that we're talking about three possible purposes or three possible categories in which you can divide up the objectives or motivations of your research, which of course can be overlapping and most of the time are and should be overlapping. The first one is, of course, the personal motivation, which I was just speaking about. What is it that motivates you to do this research? It could be general curiosity, it could be your personal interest, it could be a political passion that you are interested in, or it could simply be career advancement. And this is an area that would give me much more scope to work. So one should be very clear as to why am I interested in this particular field? Why am I interested in this particular research? The other two purposes are more of a practical and official purposes of doing the research and things that you would list in your research objective more often. The first one is a practical purpose, which is to do with what are we going to accomplish with this research, right? What is the concrete thing that I'm going to get out of doing this research? It could be to meet some particular need, so a research gap that you want to address. It could be to change some kind of a situation. If you are doing applied research, what is a situation that we want to perhaps amend through doing this kind of research? Or it could be to, attain certain kinds of goals or policy purposes, right? So this is to do with the particular need that your research will address. The other purpose is your research purpose, which is more to do with the understanding of something, to gain the particular kind of knowledge, to understand what is going on and why is this happening, right? What is that particular thing that you want to address through doing this research, right? What is that absent knowledge that you want to now gain by doing this research? So, what you are trying to then achieve through this particular, in all of these different kinds of purposes, is to try and talk about the multiple objectives or purposes of the research, what motivates you to try and do the research, right? The next thing that we then come to are, sorry, a question seems to be sort of. Uh, a slide seems to be slightly misplaced. If you go to the next research, right? So the next topic, the next important thing that we are then talking about is why do we want to do this research, right? What do you want to study, and what is the exact question that you want to address through this research, which is basically trying to formulate the overall research question of your research, right? Um, the key to a good research design is, of course, then a clear focus, right? We have listed out our purposes of research. Now we want to talk about the exact question that I want to address. And in order to have a clear focus, you, of course, then need a clear research question, which will then help us reduce our study, reduce the various questions to the essential issue that we are interested in answering, right? This is a slide on research questions. Go to the slide on research questions.
Just a minute, Pradeep.
The research question, more than anything else, influences the research plan and influences the other parts of the research plan, right? So what the question is basically doing is it is bridging the gap between the purpose of your research and the methods and the tools and techniques that you will use for data collection, the tools and techniques that you will use to actually finally do the research, right? So your research question may be seen as a starting point of research, but it may also evolve through the first few phases of your research, given particularly in qualitative research, given the interactive and inductive nature of your research. So, what we usually do is we start off with a research question. And through our pilot study, we would sort of formulate the proper research question and we would formulate the final research question that we would then use in our final research. So, a good research question for us then should be something that is clear, should be something that is intelligible, and something that is unambiguous, right? It should be something that is focused, but not too narrow. Um, and also, very, very importantly, should be practical. It should be something that we are able to research through data collection, which means that it shouldn't be extremely abstract or questions that that need the application of philosophy rather than data at the very outset, right? That could be something that comes under your sub questions that you have for your analysis. But at the beginning for data collection, you should have a practical research question that enables me to actually collect the data that I require in order to address the purposes or in order to address the research and practical and personal motives that I had listed out for myself at the very beginning. Your research question should be something that is useful. Your research question should be something that is addressing the research gap that we have formulated for ourselves, should be connected to the existing research and theory, but should also be something that is flexible enough to make way for things that we encounter within the field, right? And ultimately, and this is something that I feel is very important, is that it should be of definitely some interest to the researcher. A lot of the times, particularly during our masters, and now that the PhD seems to be more of more and more of a research, an institutional requirement, a lot of us seem to do research just for the sake of it. A lot of us seem to do research in terms of whatever seems to be the in thing at this point. So I would suggest, and this is something that I have felt particularly, that when you are doing research that you are genuinely interested in, when you're genuinely passionate about the research, you tend to do good research. Otherwise, it's something that you're doing just for the sake of it, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense in the wider scheme of things. Uh, One of the very important things then, while formulating your research question, if you can come to the next slide, is the role of existing literature in shaping research questions. And I believe you had a session on literature review in the previous session, which was again trying to talk about the importance of literature review for doing research. Usually, and I think somebody asked this question in the chat box as well, that should we have a hypothesis in qualitative research? Usually, we don't. We don't start off with a hypothesis in a very concrete sense of quantitative research hypothesis. Uh, some people do, but most of ethnographic work or most of qualitative research doesn't really have a very fixed kind of a hypothesis examination. Uh, but what becomes very important still is to have an understanding of existing literature, your theories and research, which can help formulate our research plan, right? So, as qualitative researchers, we often have hunches and working ideas that we get either from a general observation of things around us or from existing literature, from existing theories and research. So, ideally, we would start off with these hunches. Ideally, we would start off with these working ideas, but we should also remain open to emerging concepts and themes within our research itself. Our theoretical position or our initial idea of research shouldn't be so rigid that it doesn't allow for absolutely contradictory ideas that we are getting from the field. This could be something that we start off with, but we should be flexible and we should, allow ourselves to then look at or evaluate other things that we might receive from the field itself, because ultimately that's why we are doing this research, that we don't know. Had we known everything through literature and had we known everything through the existing theories, there would be no need to do the research itself, right? So it becomes very important for us to have that kind of flexibility, both in both for ourselves, but also in the design and the research plan itself, to try and accommodate these contradictory things that we might get through the process of research. And finally, then coming to the third part of your research design, which is usually what is spoken of when we speak of a research design, which is to do with uh, how are we going to exactly do the research, right? How are we going to do the study? So we have our motivations, we have our purposes, and then we have now formulated a concrete research question through which we are then trying to find the methods through which I'm going to answer this particular question, right? And the particular thing that becomes important for us is to then try and link the theories and epistemological background that we have gathered as students of the discipline, as students, as people who have started off with the research, uh, to try and think about these theories. And then through the methodology, through the different kinds of methods that we use, to tie these together with concrete ways of doing the research, the particular techniques and methods of data collection that we will be using, right? So if we go to the next slide, we'll see some elements of uh, a research design or a research plan in terms of the methods that we use. Now, what I have done is these are very basic aspects that I have chosen, which is something that you will perhaps require in all kinds of research. Now, depending on the exact research, depending on the exact methodology, you might want to detail more things, or you might want to, elaborate on a particular of or any of these components. So, but in general, what you would then have to think about is first the research setting and the population. So, exactly what is the field where I want to do the study, which is the population among whom I want to do the study, something that will, in the most comprehensive way, provide me with the richest of information pertaining to the research question that I have set for myself, right? Uh, the next bit of it then becomes sampling strategies. I can, of course, not study the entirety of populations in most cases. So, what becomes very important, much like in quantitative research, qualitative research also involves sampling because I'm not speaking to everybody, right? So, you would have to then think about what kind of sampling are you intending to do, probability or non-probability sampling. Usually for qualitative research, we use non-probability sampling, which is purposive, which is, where we are trying to gather data about a particular thing and therefore speaking to a particular kind of people, a particular people who have had a particular kind of research experience. Who have had a particular kind of experience in society, right? Uh, a lot of qualitative research also involves convenience sampling, where you are simply going from a person to person through snowball sampling, or you are getting references of somebody while speaking to somebody else. And because qualitative research essentially involves us trying to build rapport with a lot of our respondents, convenience sampling is something that we tend to use more often than not. But while doing this, what becomes important then for us also to think about is to think about the sample size and the heterogeneity of the sample that we are taking. A lot of the times, because we are using convenience sampling, it so happens that we are speaking to people on the same side of the issue, or we are speaking to people with a very similar experience or a very similar gender, class, caste composition. So, if our research so requires, we should be thinking about trying to take opinions and trying to take responses from many different kinds of people and a heterogeneous enough population. Uh, the next which don't, nor do we have unlimited time to do our research. So, what becomes important for us then to think about these how within what time period am I going to get enough data? Within what time period am I going to do my fieldwork so that I have enough time to actually devote to the analysis of the data, to actually, finally formulate the different kind of formulate the different kinds of responses that we are trying to take in and trying to get that kind of analysis done. Uh, the next bit is to and perhaps one of the most important things is to choose the appropriate method of data collection. Now, a lot of the times what happens is when we are doing qualitative research, we are using multiple methods and we are using multiple mixed methods, right? So we are doing ethnographies, but we are also doing interviews and case studies and focus groups and historical studies. Somebody was mentioning life histories. So it becomes very essential for us to figure out that for my particular research, what is the exact method or what is the exact tool and technique that I'm going to use, which will give me the best kind of information, which is going to give me the richest kind of information in the most comprehensive manner, in the most relevant manner. So, and again, there is no right or wrong way of picking the method. It would be very contextualized depending on your particular research, your particular question, right? And finally, what you would then have, based on all of this that we have figured out, is to design the fieldwork strategy itself, to design the material itself. And a lot of the times, before going into the field, it becomes important for us to try and have this kind of a design, to have this kind of a strategy already in place as much as we can before we step into the field. A lot of us step into unfamiliar fields, a lot of us step into familiar fields, but now in a different capacity. So it becomes very important for us to have these strategies of how to enter the field, right? Which is the source through which I'm going to try and figure out and try and get an in the research itself. Whether it is institutions, whether it is individual people that we might know through other aspects, or to think about incorporating different kinds of research instruments. So I might be interested in looking at different kinds of secondary material that is available. I might be interested in looking at different kinds of policies and pamphlets that are available. So again, depending on the particular research, depending on my familiarity or unfamiliarity with the field, it would be really helpful if we have particular strategies and materials ready, which will perhaps, of course, not perhaps, which will, of course, keep on evolving as we step into the field. But before going into the field, as much as you can prepare in terms of structuring the data collection, in terms of deciding where am I going to go first and where am I going to go next, it really helps to have that kind of a plan in place. So finally, what I will then take you to is what Blake and Priest spelled out in their 2019 text, which they call the 6 F's of qualitative research design, which is finding, focusing, framing, foreseeing, foregrounding, and formulating, right? Where we are trying to talk about first, selecting the appropriate participants, selecting the types of data collection, so what we were speaking about in just the previous section, then identifying the topics and research questions. We are thinking about framing, that is to construct particular culturally and diversely sensitive framework where we are able to accommodate people from the different categories within the field that we are studying or within the research that we are looking at. We are trying to foresee a research plan, a research design is basically trying to prepare us for the future, prepare us in terms of the issues that might crop up through our research. It requires us to foreground, it requires us to clearly define the central elements and components of your field. So a lot of us during our research proposals, we would be asked to give a conceptual framework. We would be asked to give particular kinds of themes and concepts that we're using and the exact definition that we are using, which again serves the institutional requirements, but also helps us get back to and keep on focusing us for the research that we are doing. And finally, it requires us to formulate. It requires us to think about the ways in which the data is going to be collected and the ways in which we are going to structure and present the data ultimately for analysis, right? So in terms of coming up with a concrete research design, I think Blake and Priest's work really gives us a good overview in terms of what are the various components that we should try and incorporate within our research design, research design or research plan. So from my side. References that is listed out within the presentation itself in case anybody wants to check out these books, these texts. Some of them I would really suggest, particularly the one by E.V. Flick and the one by Blakey and Priest, but also the one by Joseph Maxwell. Those are really good sort of tools to have with us as we are stepping into our fields for doing different kinds of research. I'll be very happy to take any questions that you have now. There are a few in the chat box. If, Maureen, are you going to, can I just read them out and answer? And
Pratichi,
or are you
first of all,
I try to answer a few through the presentation.
Thank you for the very detailed discussion on the intricacies of designing the research plan. And yes, we have a few questions in our chat box. One is how we formulate research questions for grounded theory, based research, and exploratory kind of research. Should I keep 3-4 questions for you first?
Yes,
and
you can take a couple.
Then maybe you can respond. Pratichi?
Yes, let's try and take like 2 or 3, and then I can try and answer.
Or you can take a look at the questions and you can answer the ones.
Yeah, I could do that as well. Just give me a second, yeah. So there are a couple of questions on particular kinds of research and how to formulate research questions around that. Again, I'll suggest that we go back to the purposes in order to formulate the research question. What becomes very essential for us is to try and go back to the purpose of research. And I would suggest that rather than pre-deciding the kind of theory that we are using or the kind of method that we are using, we should first try and formulate the research question itself based on the purpose. And then if you think a grounded theory is suitable, and then if you think a particular kind of method is suitable, it becomes easier for us to try and then think about the formulation of the research question. So rather than thinking about how are we going to formulate questions for this kind of method or this kind of theory, it would be good to think about the research question itself and what is the most suitable method to try and answer that question that we have raised for ourselves. Right? There's another question on what is the difference between research questions and research objectives. Yes, this is a very interesting one. The research question is the final question that I am raising, right? This is the exact question that I want to answer through my research. The objective or the purpose is what is it that I will get out of answering that question, right? What need is this research going to fulfill? Or what personal curiosity is this going to satisfy? What kind of research gap is this going to emit? So the research question could be a very narrow question pertaining to the exact field or the exact kind of research that you want to do. And the objective is more to do with the purpose or the motive that you have. And what will this research help me address? There's a question on hypothesis. I answered that mostly in qualitative research, we don't have hypothesis, but we do have working sort of hunches that we carry with ourselves when we are going into the research. It's not possible for us to be entirely blank and have no sort of no preconceived idea at all, or nor is it entirely desirable because we have done our literature review and we have a theoretical understanding, hopefully, which will help us, at least have a working hunch for the research. For the research design part, is it always important to have a pre-methodology at hand? At times when results and analysis don't match the methodology, we tend to mold the methodology. Absolutely, that's what I said at the very beginning, not just about the methods, but all parts of your research design are something that should be and must be flexible with the answers that you are getting from the field. But it's always helpful to have a working method or a methodology with you when you are going into the field. So, so that you are not completely lost when you are in the field and you're simply, trying to figure the way once you get on the bus. So it's always better to try and have some kind of map in mind, but also then be open to the fact that we would ultimately be changing or be open to sort of modifying these methods if it's so required. There's a question on mixed methods include hypothesis. They can, but not always. I think there is a session on mixed methods later in the day today, and I think we'll be able to answer these questions better. But generally, hypothesis is not something that should or must be included. Usually in qualitative research, it is not, but it can be. It's not an absolute no. Nothing in social research usually is or should be an absolute no. If you think that your research is going to benefit from a hypothesis very much, perhaps that's something that you can think about. Is it necessary to include theories in qualitative research? Um, Not just in qualitative research, but in all kinds of research, there should be a theoretical or a conceptual framework that you're using. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are exactly taking the theory that has been provided to you, or you are, not thinking about any kind of modification, or you're not thinking about an openness to that theory being disproved. But your research it's not simply data collection. We're not simply describing things. We're trying to, as social scientists, we're trying to make a statement about certain kinds of social processes. We are trying to make a statement about certain kinds of phenomenon that are happening in society, which is not just about the individual respondents that we have spoken to, which is not just about describing things. So any kind of research, whether it is qualitative, whether it is quantitative, whether it's mixed methods, whether it is content analysis, research necessarily should have uh, an, a way in which it connects the data that we are acquiring with the theoretical framework or a theoretical background, right? Uh, Quickly try to take a couple more before we run out of time. How do we structure a research plan when we have two or more theoretical perspectives and framework? Will it make data analysis confusing? Uh, in that case, your research question should try and accommodate these theoretical perspectives. The clarity of your research will primarily come from the research question itself. So, if you have a very clear research question that is able to accommodate these frameworks, then you can very well try and do that kind of data analysis or try and do that kind of data collection itself, right? So when you have a proper research question, which is concrete, which is as I said, which is helping you guide the data collection process itself, which is helping to guide the process of research itself, it can very well accommodate multiple theoretical perspectives. Again, depends on the context of the particular research that you are trying to do and the particular frameworks that you are trying to apply. So if you are trying to apply, extremely contradictory perspectives in your research, it would be very interesting to think about the kind of question that you will come up with and how is it that you are going to then try and think about data collection. But most of us, we do tend to not have a singular framework more often than not. We do tend to beg and borrow, particularly today, from multiple theoretical frameworks. And that can actually, depending on the context, be very well formulated within research questions and then try and sort of answer to the particular objectives or the purposes that we have sent out for ourselves. In life history research, what is the sampling size and what which sampling strategy is more suitable? again, these are very particular questions which would, depending on the particular answer. There's another question on ideal sample size. So your sample would depend on the question that you are trying to address. Your sample would depend on the kind of purpose that you are trying to meet. If your purpose is a very general purpose, if you are trying to talk about a wide social phenomenon, you will probably want to have a larger sample. Or if you are, thinking of doing shorter interviews or focus groups, you will probably have a larger sample. If you are doing case studies, if you're doing life histories, if you're doing participant observation, you're probably observing one small community. So depending on the particular question, you will choose a method and your samples according to that. Is it important that while taking purposive sampling in qualitative research, the research must include the criteria of inclusivity and exclusivity? When you are doing purposes sampling, usually you are automatically including some people and you are excluding some people, right? That is the purpose of your purposive sampling. So, by the very virtue of it being purposive sampling, you are excluding and including people. Now, within the people that you are including, it's always nice to have a heterogeneous kind of a sample in any kind of research that we do. So once we have included, for example, I'm doing research about the city of Delhi and say young women in Delhi. So it would always be better for me to try and include young women from different classes and different castes if I'm trying to make a statement about young women. If I'm trying to make a statement about women of a particular caste, it would be nice to then think about the different kinds of class composition, right? So heterogeneity within that in purposive sampling is something that we should try and accommodate as much as possible. Okay. Any other questions? Are there any restrictions on how many research questions can be formed in a qualitative research? Okay. So here, when I refer to research question, I'm referring to the central question of your research, not the individual sub questions that you might be asking in your questionnaire, the number of which might increase or decrease again depending on the kind of research. Here, when we are speaking about the research question, we are talking about the initial research statement or your one single question that you are trying to address through the particular research. What is the correct structure and hierarchy for writing the methodology in a thesis? Are there specific elements or steps that should be followed to ensure clarity and rigor in the presentation of research methods? Different institutions suggest different methods and have different requirements. For me, what is always easier to do and what I usually stick to is I usually start with the central question and then try and think about the primary methods that I would have employed. I am a qualitative researcher, so I usually employ qualitative research. So I would think about the different kinds of qualitative research techniques that I use. So ethnography, cyber-ethnography, all of those techniques. And then finally going on to, perhaps secondary techniques that I might be using, say secondary data or some kind of archival work that you're using. That's usually the method that that's usually the way I present my research methods, but then also different institutions have their requirements. So while writing your thesis, it might be a good idea to check your institutional requirement. Can you put the reference slides on the screen? I will share the entire PPT, and I
Yes,
think the
I
participants
think
can.
the entire presentation will be shared in our LMS platform, as I have already mentioned in the comment section. And thank you so much, Dr. Pratichi. I think you have addressed all the questions that are there in the chat box. We are so happy to have you and wish to have future endeavors with you again. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank you so
And
much,
to
Naveen. Thank you so much, Gargi. Again, I'm sorry that for the laptop glitch, but at least we were able to have a chat.
no,
And
no, I know this is the only problem we have with this online workshop and conferences, right? But yeah, it got solved, and I'm very thankful for that. And
yes,
also,
and my email is also there in the presentation. In case anybody has further questions you want to chat, I'll be very very happy to
sure,
address
sure.
it, address more
Definitely,
questions.
definitely,
Thank you
definitely.
so much.
Thank you so much. And for our participants, we'll have our next session at 12 Indian Standard Time. And we will have the session by Professor Joydeep Borwa. He will be speaking on tools to analyze qualitative data. So for now, I'll be ending the session here. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank
Thank
you. Thank
you.
you.